Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another founder-led sales story where founders who have successfully navigated their founder-led selling journey share with those who are still in the middle of it. I'm Pete Kazanji, author of Founding Sales, the Startup Sales Handbook, and your host. Today we have Rohan Suri, co-founder of Nooks, an AI pipeline generation platform that helps B2B sales teams dial faster, coach reps more effectively, and build targeted prospect lists. Rohan has led Nooks to millions of ARR with a remarkable journey from a Stanford student project to securing $70 million in funding from Kleiner Perkins, Lochy Groom, and Tola Capital. My biggest takeaways from our conversation were around Rohan's ability to follow customer heat signals rather than his original vision, his trial-based sales motion that created both faster deals and product velocity, and how they transformed from a virtual classroom tool to a multi-product sales platform by obsessively watching what customers actually used. I was particularly impressed by how they use real-time call blitzes as their demo environment, letting prospects immediately experience value before purchasing. This try before you buy approach became their secret weapon for both sales acceleration and product feedback. You'll also hear about their clever LinkedIn acquisition strategy that created outsized awareness for a small company and how they balance founder selling with their first sales hires. So with that, here's Rowan. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another founder-led sales stories where founders who have successfully navigated their founder-led selling journey share with those who are still in the middle of it. We're here with Rohan Suri, founder of Nooks. I'm excited to be here with Rohan in that I feel that Nooks has done an amazing job of pivoting their way to rapid success and really catching up and taking the lead in an emerging category. And that usually only kind of happens from the amazing product feedback and kind of like heat-seeking missile behavior that you get in a founder-led sales motion. And it's helped vault them to what I'm going to call oodles of ARR and $70 million in funding from names like Kleiner Perkins, Lochy Groom, and Tola Capital. Rohan, I'm really pumped to have you here.
To be here too, Pete. Thanks.
Wonderful. Well, so for folks who aren't familiar with what Nooks does, and I think our audience are founders here as opposed to sales leadership or what have you, who of course would be like Nooks. Obviously, I know what Nooks is. Maybe you can kind of share with folks the problem that Nooks solves, for what type of organization, and like who the humans in the organization are who kind of care about solving these problems.
Yeah. So Nooks, we're an AI pipeline gen platform. So we help basically customers build more pipeline. We do this in three ways. We help them dial faster and get more conversations over the phone. So we specialize in like phone conversations. We have a coaching product which helps people get better at those conversations, through things like AI role play, scorecards, things like that. And then we have a prospecting part of the product which helps people use intelligence and AI to build targeted lists so that they're calling the right people. But we kind of sell to anyone that has B2B sales team selling to other businesses. Typically, if you have inside sales, SDRs, BDRs, we do sell to AE teams too. But doing any kind of like prospecting, outbound motion, Nooks is a good fit for. But kind of our ICPs like sales leaders, SDR leaders, those types of people in an organization are usually great fits for us.
Yeah. And kind of maybe you can characterize for us like what your rough deal size is, this, kind of now, and maybe like what it was, I don't know, like 24 months ago or what have you. And also kind of what the current sales organization looks like.
Yeah. So it's funny, we have like a really, really wide range of ACVs from, $500,000 to, 5K. So we literally have like 100x range. So we do have segments but I think, we started definitely more down market. Like I would say more in the SMB commercial. I think a lot of companies start there. It's hard to go close a really, really big logo when you're first starting. So it's definitely shifted more and more mid-market enterprise over the time and intentionally, right? Like we put specific efforts there. And so it wasn't something that just happened by chance. But we still have this really strong growing, what we call our SME and commercial segments. The team right now is we have almost, I want to say 30 sellers, like individual IC sellers across four different segments. We have SME, commercial, mid-market, and enterprise. So yeah, that's what the team looks like today.
And so, I mean, and this is what I kind of mentioned in the intro is that you guys have really kind of hit an inflection point where you found something that fit the market by kind of like pivoting your way there, and then I've really kind of scaled up. But 24 months ago, um, I feel that your sales organization was not nearly this size, and I feel that that's the point at which you kind of had that lower average selling price. Maybe you can kind of characterize what that initial kind of like ASP and kind of who the humans were in the organization that you were selling to when it was primarily you selling.
Yeah. So when we started, so we started with a product that had like a really low ACV. It was like just our virtual sales floor that we were selling at for like anywhere between 8 and 15, sometimes up to 20K, but it was like right around the 8 to 15K mark. And then we started launched like, initial product like pretty early on. And we're able to charge a lot more for that. So we had our dial launch. And then that boosted ACVs a bunch. But we were still probably closer to the 20 to 30K ACV. And that stayed true for quite a bit. And now, our ACVs are closer to like 50K across all segments. It's like blended. Yeah.
And maybe actually, I think it would be really kind of fun is for you to take folks through that kind of journey where you guys started right post COVID, I want to say,
Yes.
and had like initial hypothesis around virtual collaboration and not necessarily of a sales capacity. Went to sales, for a specific use case, and then started doing other kind of like use cases um, within sales. Maybe you can kind of take people through that because I think that that's really the crux of what has driven your success is kind of like I was saying, being that heat-seeking missile and finding pull in the market.
Yeah. We started, I started Nooks with two other co-founders back in 2020. It was during COVID. We were actually studying at Stanford, and school was remote, and so we were bored and we didn't know what to do. And this seemed like my other co-founder was Dan. He brought the project to me and was like, hey, like getting feedback and advice. And eventually he was like, why don't you just help me build this? And so that's kind of how it started. We initially had this theory that like, people were, thanks to COVID, a lot of what was happening in person was now happening virtually. And we had this hypothesis around, hey, we could make this like virtual collaboration and like we could replicate the best parts of in person virtually. And so when we first built Notes, it actually like almost was focused around schools. And, we were at school at the time. And so we actually gave it to Stanford. I want to say like at some point that, 2020, 2021, half of like Stanford's CS program was basically using Nooks. I still have friends today that will, I'll catch up with them. They're like, "Oh yeah, you're on that like virtual classroom thing, right?" And like,
So great.
yeah,
How's
they're
that
like, "Yeah,"
going?
they're like, "I used that in class. I remember that." And it's like really funny. It's like how much the product has changed since then. But like we literally had like half of the Stanford department, like students using Yux at that time for like basically all things like virtual collaboration. We There was actually a point at which Stanford was interested in buying it and like purchasing it as a proper thing because so many people were using it. And I remember just getting like vague prices of like what it would cost. And like, I mean, we were talking on the orders of like $3 a user. It was like such low, like basically their willingness to pay was so low. And I think we talked to some advisors, and I remember them like actually there was like this one conversation we had with someone that was like literally like he's like, look, he's like, I personally built an ed tech business. And he's like, let me tell you this. I do not recommend starting an ed tech business. If you have it is extremely hard. And it's like if you can build an ed tech business, successful ed tech business, you could just as easily build a normal SaaS business that's 10 times larger. Like it is just extremely hard. And so he's like, it's not saying you can't do it, but if you could do it, the amount of effort required is like the same as building a business like 10x as big. And I think that just like, we saw how hard it was to sell it to Stanford. We had this idea of like people were going to go back in person anyways in schools. And so that's where we really refocused and said, well, why don't we focus on, um, workplace collaboration because, those people are likely going to be continuing to work remotely. And we actually had a couple people kind of using that just through natural as like uh,
Just
the
goofing
product was
around,
open.
kind of like
Yeah,
people
exactly.
people adopting it.
Yep. Yeah. So we kind of had naturally some people. there. And that was kind of like our part one pivot, which is kind of refocus and said, hey, like let's do virtual, virtual workspace. And so we dug in there, and we got some users and like we got some people, but we never got anyone paying for it. And I think like the thing that we saw that like was like, we tried that probably for about like, I want to say 6 to 9 months of coming up with something. Like really, we were just focused on like product adoption metrics. So it's like, how do we get people to really uh, use it on a daily basis and have success with it and be willing to pay for it? And like we tried to grow probably for 6 to 9 months, was not successful. We tried different things in the product, tried different form factors. We had different hypotheses on what that virtual collaboration would look like. And there was a point basically where I think someone on the team had left because we weren't making much traction. So we were losing momentum as a startup. And the founders and I had to sit in and be like, all right, we need to like change something significantly because this current path's not working. So that's and there was actually a couple candidate options. Sales was one of them because we actually had a sales team using Nooks. But that was like there was other ones we talked about like could consulting teams use it? Like it was kind of interesting, but our high level idea was like, let's focus on a more niche use case instead of being broad in any workplace. Let's focus on a more niche use case.
Was the sales team that was using it, were they like having a lot of success and so you saw some initial sparks there, or were they also kind of like,
No, they were using it quite a bit actually. So they were using like they were the ones that were in it the most, right? So they were in it like 6, 7 hours a day. And so we saw that and we're like, okay, that's pretty interesting. And so, of the candidate options, I remember I was actually the one that like kind of exploring all of them. I was like, okay, let's go try to get a couple of teams from each of these. And like we got
each of the different verticals,
yeah, each of the different
sales,
verticals.
consulting, the
Yeah,
different
yeah,
hypotheses?
exactly. From each of the different hypotheses. And we went to our network, we got a couple investor intros, things like that, or referrals. And we managed to get like, I think it was like on the sales side, it was just like 2 teams, actually, that we got to be interested in looking at it. We had this hypothesis that like, okay, like we were in virtual collaboration at the time. So it was like we started like saying like, how do we like build this specifically for sales? And they were doing call blitzes, and we're like, can you make the call blitzes more efficient? Um, and we really focused like our thing at in the early stages was like, how can we have like a team come on, try it out for like a call blitzer session and like want to continue using it? And it was like that cycle. And it was like every week we had one coming up and we would want to make sure that like that would be successful when we build a product towards that. So those were like the really early days when we were just still kind of finding product market fit.
Yeah, well, and I think the cool thing about that is like, you initially had a hypothesis that there, would be a need for this virtual collaboration space. And like I'm sure it was fine for school. And then, businesses obviously have a much more substantial economic impulse. But then, what's the thing within that? And I think what you observed, and I think anyone who's done sales would tell you like, yeah, sales is hard, and kind of being isolated by yourself without peer accountability and peer camaraderie and what have you, that kind of like the buzz. It's not just the buzz and the learning of the sales floor, it's like the backbone and like the invigoration and what have you. And I think you guys kind of saw that, like you empowered serendipity for yourself. And then um and then probably what ended up happening was you probably saw like higher performance in those teams who were then doing their call blitzes together. Like, oh, actually, we do our call blitzes versus just skipping them and actually not doing them. And then being in that position to say, oh, okay, well, like, yes, we're a virtual sales floor, but like really what we're in the business of is helping people call more, right? Because the
Yeah.
virtual, because the collaboration is the thing that makes people be like, all right, let's go, pop a Zen
Yes.
in, let's rock. Um, and and then and then that kind of led you to the next thing, which was, all right, well, like maybe there's other ways we can make these guys call more, and maybe you can talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I think like, we always had this hypothesis actually, even when we were in the virtual office, it was like, can we replicate that in-person experience virtually? And then can we like, because we now have all these interactions like in one place that's normally happening in person, can we add AI on top of this to make it like even more efficient? And we always had this hypothesis being engineers, kind of like the initial thought was like engineering teams and product teams, and like that's where we started. Then, like you said, we got to this, these sales teams that were using it, and we saw like one, they wanted to do it again, right? They did it once, and they're like, let's do it next time. We actually had good success, and then you actually had like those numbers increase, and it was like compared to engineering, where it's like it's a lot harder to like replicate what one like engineer is doing with another, just like very different. Where sales are like they're all trying to do the same thing, and so like the benefit of that like collaboration and like it's easier to automate with from an AI perspective, it really like fit our hypothesis a lot better as like a kind of an ICP to focus on. Um, but like to your point, I mean, we got some initial early success with the Salesforce product. And it was like it got to the point where we could pretty consistently, like if you told me like three things about a company, I could tell you they're probably a good fit. And so like once we got to that point, that's when you knew you had emotion of like, okay, this would work. You're like, okay, do they like, do they make calls? Like, do they have an SDR team? Like, are they remote? Probably a good fit. And like 80% of the time it'd be like, yeah, I'm interested. So that was like that's kind of when we hit like I wouldn't say like PMF, but like at least like some sort of like fit
Yeah,
product market fit around.
repeatability.
Yeah,
Yeah, like the
yeah,
promise resonated, right? Like you actually had identified a need in the market
yes,
where, the consulting teams and engineering team, like you could imagine, well, have you ever thought about your engineers getting together on like, a virtual workspace and be like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't want the engineers to get interrupted. I barely want them to have like Slack alerts. What? Get out of
yeah,
here,
yeah,
right? And I think what you guys did was you positioned yourself well to be able to see, right, kind of those bright sparks, and then to your credit, you've kind of followed that, you followed that impulse and that pull, and then just thought about, okay, we are actually being hired, like, Nooks is being hired to enhance calling performance of these SDR teams, right? So it's like focusing on the job to be done, right, which is helping these organizations call better and generate more pipeline, or actually initially
yes,
call better, and then
yeah,
expand that. Like, why are they calling? Oh, they're calling in order to, enlarge pipeline. Oh, okay, well, like maybe we can help them call better. Let's add a parallel dialer. Maybe we can help them with like list cleaning, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's doesn't get any better than that when it comes to kind of like following following your nose for pull there. Who was your first? I know that you had a couple of those kind of like quasi customers. Who was like the first customer who really, when you showed up and you're like, yeah, this is what we do. We help remote sales organizations have better accountability and better learning and better esprit de corps, and it drives better performance, et cetera, et cetera. Who was the first customer that were like that really kind of like clicked with that message and bought?
yeah. So I mean, the first customer that like stands out to me, they were, and I'm gonna share this with actually Modern Health. They weren't actually our first customer, but because the actual procurement took longer, but like they were basically like very close to the first customer. Um,
They were the first and biggest on a size adjusted basis. They were the first.
um, yeah, they were like but they were basically the first deal cycle that I ran effectively. And I remember we brought them on the FPR team, and like it was just so funny. Like, we did the session on like the call blitz, and then we had a feedback session with their directors. Oh, and like we actually got introduced from it was actually funny. Like our lawyer introduced us to the team. Like our lawyer
Sweet.
was the same lawyer as like Modern Health, and so like that's how we got the connection. So it
Lawyer
worked out.
SDR is kind of expensive lead gen, but
I know.
whatever it takes in the beginning.
Yeah. So it was funny. But I remember that like this was a funny meeting where like basically we had this session for feedback. And at this point, like we didn't really have something like that worked yet. And so I remember hopping on the call, and I'm like prepared to go in asking like, like, do you guys want to use it again? Like, how did it go? And then they come in and they're like, oh, we want it. And we have one really, really big ask. And I'm like, what's the ask? And they're like, we just want to keep it on while we're getting it through procurement. And I was like, oh, keep it on. Like,
That's a good
sure.
sign.
Like, yeah, I was
Okay.
like, I was like, no problem. Like, we were just worried about people using it, and I wasn't even thinking about paying. And it was like, okay, like that's clearly like that's something that they're
Good
willing to
sign.
pay for and they want. and they're willing to send it. So that was like one of the first moments of like an actual deal, like where we got someone to really be like, hey, we're going to cough up like 10 grand for this. And then, it's funny. They were one of our first customers. They ended up buying every single product we released since. Like when we came out with the dialer, they bought the dialer. When we came out with our coaching, they bought the coaching. When they came out with our AI prospector, they bought that. And so every year they kind of like upgraded and grown. And they've like basically doubled in, ACV every year, which has been awesome. But it was one of our like very early customers that we grew with. So that maybe that's like one of the deals that early on that I think
But I think
stands out.
what's kind of cool there is, you know, having done those three pivots, right? So like from classroom to business, from horizontal business to vertical sales, and then saying like, I guess that would be two pivots there. And then importantly, and maybe like a little bit of a messaging pivot. It was a third skip here from, hey, collaboration to no, sales floor, accountability, right? Like esprit de corps, et cetera, et cetera. And then when you got that and you showed up to those folks and you're like, hey, this is what we do. They're like, you're right. That is exactly what it does. It just did it for us just now. And we'd like it to do it again. And we'd like it to not stop doing that. And so, you kind of, at that point, kind of felt like you're off to the races. You kind of mentioned pricing a little bit there. How did you end up evolving pricing over time? Did it change at all? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, I think the lesson, which is the lesson that I heard from other people, but like I didn't really follow it, which was like simple is better. Like try not to over engineer pricing. I think we like first, like literally, I remember the first kind of a packaging I put together was like it was like tiers of seats or something like that. It was like 0 to 10 seats is like 5K, and like 10 to 25 is like 15K or whatever. And we did like these like tiers and like based on number of seats. And yeah, I think the takeaway was like that was overly complex. People are used to buying seat-based pricing. Like just give them seat-based pricing and like, they're used to that. And so we just ended up going very simple seat-based. So that was like, and that took us like probably like, maybe like a month to get to that point. But like, yeah, I think a lot of people probably, like, including me, I even heard that advice probably from someone, and like I didn't really heed it, and I was like, oh, I think like this like tier base makes more sense, and then like just like try to lower the friction for people to buying as much as possible early on. You don't want to like don't add more friction to the deal because they don't really understand how your pricing model works. That doesn't make sense. And so yeah, we do into seat based, and we've been seat based, and now our pricing got a little bit more complicated as we have consumption now and like a couple other things like that. So but I think definitely early on you don't want to overcomplicate it.
You want to be easy to do business with, and this is something that I talk about in founding sales and the product marketing kind of chapter, which has pricing in it, which is if there's like a dominant paradigm for how pricing is done in the vertical that you're in, and of course in sales tech, the king of sales tech is Salesforce, and everyone's just used to seat-based pricing there, then just, generally speaking, you want to kind of follow those cow paths there. And we had the same issue with Atrium as well, unless there's like a particularly compelling reason why it needs to be different, right? But it has to be like really compelling in order for it to be different, because otherwise you're just going to confuse the hell out of the buyer. And then maybe you won't confuse the hell out of the buyer, but certainly you'll confuse the hell out of their finance team, right? So they may get it, but then now you're going to
Yeah.
have to get them to communicate it to someone else, and that can be kind of a disaster. Kind of related to iterating pricing, kind of how did your ideal customer profile shift over time? And I think part of this is you talked about like, well, first it was colleges, and then we figured out they had no money, and then it was like horizontal, like, and it was horizontal businesses, and then we realized
Yeah.
that they had like hyper diffuse needs, right? And we didn't want to be at a $5 or $10 or $15 a month kind of like Zoom slash Notion slash whatever cost, and then you got into sales. So that was like obviously an iteration there. But then how did ICP refine even further? Like after you saw Modern Health being like, no, let's go, don't you dare turn it off. How did that inform? How did you guys tuned up ICP over the next 12 months or so?
Yeah, honestly, like, I don't think our ICP actually changed much from there. Like it was actually just
Great.
to your point, it's like refining the job to be done, right? It's like your job to be done is not a virtual collaboration. Like I think like that was the really important like insight and observation that we had early on. is that like if we were like a collaboration tool, like we'd be still charging like $20 a month, right, per team. Our job to be done is actually
Right.
like our job to be done is like like the first level is like, okay, make more calls, right? And then it's like a level above that, it's like actually like build pipeline using the phone. And then a level even above that is just like make more pipeline in general. And like you get to like earn the right to like tackle each of those higher rings as your product evolves and as you build more trust with your users. So I think that's kind of how it evolved. But like honestly, today we saw the very similar teams that we started with, and we kind of actually intentionally went deep within one ICP rather than going broad and saying, hey, there's like other bunch of other verticals that we can go after.
Yeah. And I guess in this case, probably what you've done is you've just gone up in terms of segments, but still looking at organizations that meet those criteria, like, large sales organizations, primarily SDRs, right? Primarily
Yeah.
SDR, and also phone based, which, I mean, I think the good news there is that with the rise of sales engagement tools like Outreach and Sales Loft and Apollo and so on and so forth, prospect inboxes are kind of disaster areas, and so that has really made it such that the phone has become much more important, or Back
Totally.
to the Future, where
Yeah.
the phone has been much more important there. And I would imagine at this point, given the fact that it's not just a virtual sales floor, but also it's parallel dialing and what have you, you probably have removed the virtual SDR, virtual, or distributed remote organization requirement, because you can imagine if you have like 50 SDRs in San Mateo or Austin or what have you, those folks could still very much benefit from a Nooks parallel dialer, and at this point now, list builder, et cetera, et cetera. Has that has that evolved as well?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that is maybe one of the early criteria that we changed, which was like, okay, we don't actually need to be remote. Any team that makes builds pipeline, and yeah, like originally it's like has to be building pipeline over the phone. Now it's like really we can actually work with any team. We actually like there was some things that changed. So like early on, for example, like we didn't work well for teams that had no existing calling motion. And if they don't like build any, it's like they had to have a motion that already works, and we're like putting gasoline on that. Today, we can actually take organizations that like do not have a strong calling culture and build that out because we just our product is so mature. We have the things, we have the tools like the AI role play simulators where you can actually practice right with AI, and like we have a trainer, and like we have a lot of the coaching and enablement things that enable teams that like don't have a strong calling motion to do it, and even our CS team is built in a way that can help customers be successful that way. So we've actually that's one thing that has expanded our TAM a little bit. Where I think early on we just saw like those trials would not go successfully, and we were like, okay, we should
Exactly.
qualify those out. But now today, I think we're actually we're pretty reliably able to take a company, regardless of whether they have a cold calling motion, make sure they have this the pieces in place. I mean, they need to have some sort of PMF if the company does. We can't build that out, but we can kind of get them to figure out prospecting over the phone. So yeah.
Yeah, and part of that is like a kind of like Jeffrey Moore crossing the chasm sort of situation, where when the first folks that are going to resonate with the Nooks value proposition would be the folks that are in the white hot center, right? So distributed, yes, they have a calling based motion, and that's the only way they can connect with their customers. They actually can't email them, right? That would be someone where we're like, oh man, our distributed organization, because of COVID, is making it really hard for us to enforce and drive calling behavior. And we're just hosed. We're hosed, right? And then, of course, you guys show up and you're like, well, check this out. And they're like, oh my God, yay, Nooks. And then, as you kind of advance along the product adoption life cycle, then you get to the next folks who are like, yeah, you know what? We have noticed that email response rates are deteriorating, and we haven't done a ton of calling historically, but
Yeah.
boy howdy, we have a C-level initiative to start thinking about what that might look like, because we're observing that the email situation is a disaster, right? And that's not like an early adopter pioneer That's
Right.
more maybe like
Right.
early majority sort of thing. And then you could imagine, but the other thing too is imagine trying to fight that battle with your early product, which was probably super
Yeah.
janky and like
Yeah.
buggy and so on and so forth. So you want to start out with people who have the white hot pain. And then you can start, and then like your CS team gets better. Your CS team is like, oh, we actually can help educate people on how to actually call. And then now you can kind of get the higher and higher hanging fruit versus the kind of low hanging fruit initially. I mean, I think that's like a very kind of common thing. And then especially when you have like a new category where in you guys' case, like, yeah, there were parallel dialers before in the form of like Connect Leader and Connect and Sell and what have you. And then of course Orem had kind of gone out the gate a little earlier than Nooks, but you guys like were able to catch up very quickly. Regardless, it kind of was like a new category. And so generally speaking, those like larger organizations are going to be less apt to resonate with a new emerging category, unless of course it's something that only they can use, right? So like um like Workday is the example that I like to use. But even in that case, like Workday was an existing category of HRIS that was moving from on-prem to the cloud. So you had mentioned trials earlier, and I think that there was some you had mentioned previously that trials were something that was really important to you guys early on. You're like, hey, we're gonna have someone do a call blitz and then say, hey, how was that? Did that continue to be the case where you guys did a lot of trial kind of components to your sales motion?
Yeah. I would say like the trial part of our sales motion was probably one of the biggest reasons we were so successful and our product velocity was so high. Because it's this really strong forcing function for engineers, for the whole company to put your product to the test of like, hey, can you actually double pipeline for your customer in this time period? And you get this feedback loop immediately of like, they either buy or they don't, and you're put up to the test. And like a lot of product velocity is just about how do you empower your engineers and your entire company around very clear feedback loops from like, are they successful? Like part of the reason sales is so successful is like kind of like you either hit your quota or you don't. People don't typically have this for engineering, right? There's no like very clear like benchmark of success for engineering. The thing is like when you have this like really tight feedback loop, whereas like you literally your product has to work really well. You have 2 week cycle, and you have basically dozens of these running every month. You have this really strong feedback loop, and if the product degrade quality degrades slightly, you really quickly know and you can address it. And so I thought it was a very successful part of our motion. We never did PLG. We actually like it was never like we actually explicitly avoided a PLG motion, but we always did this like trial sales led motion, and it worked really really well.
It's almost like you could KPI your engineering team on win rate
Yeah, yeah.
because
I
that's
mean,
kind of what you were
honestly, like
doing, right?
that's
Like
that's
I
very
think
similar.
like
Yeah,
yeah, well, like that's so um, Slack talks about this a lot. One of the benefits of like month to month product pricing is like if somebody churns because they're not getting utility, like right? Like the annual contracts have a tendency to hide those sort of things. And in your case, what you were doing was it was like pre-sale environment where it's like no, our promise is that we're gonna do like a Collison Stripe Collison install on your call blitzes, and you're gonna see a change in your behavior. And if you don't buy it, right? And I feel that a friend of mine was an early seller at Chorus, and she figured out this really clever kind of trial motion where initially Chorus and Gong and those guys had most of their product marketing was around call coaching, right? Like, hey, you're gonna install a coaching culture. The managers are gonna be able to listen to calls and they're gonna be able to coach reps. But it was like this kind of like Rube Goldberg machine of like, first like the mousetrap's gonna hit like this, and then the thing's gonna go up, and then win rates are gonna go up, right? And what
yeah,
this woman Katrina London figured out was that the people who really had a high intensity of need that call recording software could handle were the reps, right? Like literally just recording things that they would forget, right? So like as an example, when is the CFO going to be back from paternity leave? And so she realized this, and so she started doing these parallel trial motions where, because early
Yeah.
on they'd be like, all right, you're going to go ahead and listen to some calls and you're going to give your reps some feedback. And it's just like, dude, this is never going to impact anything anytime soon in any kind of like short term. And what she did was she said like, hey, we're gonna allow the managers to pretend that they're going to listen to calls, right? Because they need to feel, it's kind of like Maggie Shelton in the Simpsons, right? Sorry, Maggie Simpson in the Simpsons with the fake driving wheel or like steering wheel in the car, where it's just like, hey, here you go, Mr. Manager. Like you can go ahead and pretend that you're going to listen to these calls and coach on it, but the reality is she would go and she would talk to the reps and say, hey, so here's the situation. I'm a rep, you're a rep. You're going to get on a call. You're going to jump off the call. You're going to forget when the CFO is coming back from maternity leave. You're going to forget who the other person was. You're going to jump into the call after it's been transcribed. You're going to look it up. It's going to save your ass. They're like, okay. And then she would come back a week later and say like, hey, how many times did you do that? And every single rep would be like, me, I did it. It saved my ass. It's amazing. And she's like, okay, cool. Did you want to turn this off or you want to keep it on? And all the reps are like, keep it on, keep it on, right? And I think that that's a very important thing is to say, can you do impact in the short term? And then I think what's kind of cool about that is that you can almost manufacture a compelling event in that situation where if you can get people to turn it on versus if you can't prove impact in the short term, oftentimes you need the business to have decided that they're going to do a thing, and that can be a lot tougher. um, and I think kudos to you guys for figuring that out and then putting the challenge to engineering and product in order to do that. Do you guys still do that today?
Yes. It's a different scale. For newer products, absolutely. And so that is like we're very driven around, new deals, and we have
Time to
that like
wow.
that motion. So absolutely. I think to your point, like the sales motion, obviously it helps with product velocity, but it also, it's one of our biggest levers for accelerating deals. Because there's only a few ways to create demand, right? For people that don't think they want to buy. You can try to convince them over a slide deck, or you can have someone else tell them. But one of the best ways is like they see the results themselves for their own company, and like now you're suddenly like, okay, well that's compelling data, right? And so, um, you know, using the data from their own
Do you want to
company,
do you want to keep generating this pipeline at this rate, or did you
yes,
want to go back to the old version of how you
they,
generate pipeline at the
you
at
have
the
to have
old
a
rate?
you have to have a product that is like very low implementation. I think that's like one of the key things, and so we always built that from the get go that it was literally 2 minutes to set up Nooks. Like a rep could do it themselves and start dialing. Like it was that easy. And so we always built it in a way that was really, really easily set. You could set it up so easily so that like you could go through that trial motion with low friction. But yeah,
I think the example that I like, there's a publication called Sequoia publishes, it's called the Templeton Compression, and it's about and I think the term they use is the sales ready product. There's a product and there's a sales ready product. And so oftentimes what ends up happening, like I think that PLG is just this huge psyop that essentially has, it's like founders coping so they don't have to talk to customers. Now that being said, providing leverage and removing friction such that you can do a Collison install, right? And like, Looker did this during their sales motion. So actually like Lloyd Tabb, who was the founder of Looker, he would go in and like install Looker for organizations and like, get them, tied into the cloud data warehouse and so on and so forth. Early on, Looker for the longest time, they had a 1-to-1 AE and SE ratio because they would show up and they would like install cloud BI into the organization. Was it PLG? No, it wasn't PLG, but it was sales ready, right? And it allowed people to have this wow. And then you would say, okay, cool, we're going to take it away. And then people would be like, no, 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 please don't do that. Please don't do it. Right. The example I like to use is in the movie Ghostbusters, right, where like they get the ghost out of the ballroom, et cetera, and then they tell the person what the price is going to be, and the guy's like, I had no idea it's going to be so much. Like I won't pay it. And then Bill Murray's like, that's okay. We'll just go ahead and put the ghost back into the ballroom. And the guy's like, no, don't do that. Please don't do that. Now, people have to actually want it. And like this is something that we always struggle with at Atrium was installing, performance analytics into organizations. It was cool and important for people to see, but it was also one of those things that like managers and sales leaders and what have you could like maybe be like, yeah, like we aspire to have better metrics and better analytics, but doing something with it is probably something that it's like going to be a longer burn. And so even though we were able to install, like do a very quick install of Atrium into an organization, it didn't have the same sort of impact where like if all of a sudden it went away, they'd be like, no, 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 right? And so that I think, I mean, analytics products generally have that issue as opposed
Yeah,
to
yeah, it's
workflow
both. Yeah,
products. But I think that your point is well taken, which is you want to make sure that you're like delivering business impact in a way that if it goes away immediately, people would be really sad.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
That's one of our
so
big
so
levers for accelerating timelines. Yeah, absolutely.
so trials work really well. What was something that did not work well at all?
I mean, there was a time early on, we actually had an advisor that was like very against trials. It's kind of funny. He's like, look, like no one does trials. He's like, so much software, not no one, but he's basically like, most software sold without a trial. And it was like, I'm like, let's just try that. Like, let's try doing deals without a trial. He's like, people do this, it's like a thing. Most like true actually, for what it's worth, a lot of software is sold without like any kind of trial, or like they do paid POCs and things like that. And so we tried that early on, and I was actually pretty against it. And then we did the data, and like basically like the ones that we tried without it, like we sold a couple, but like it was just slower conversions. And we just like we went back to what was working and we just did that. So yeah.
It's hard when you're doing a new category, right? Because people are like, "What is this craziness? What are you talking about? Like, what is this? What is this crazy voodoo magic?" And then, so if you can figure out a way of impacting, like you were saying, that can be a superpower. Like Sales Loft and Outreach were a good example of this. Um, Now, they had like a kind of a heavier lift where if an organization didn't have good data hygiene or good data in place or what have you, that would be a very big constraint. But like if you could deploy, outreach into an organization in 2016 or 2017, then all of a sudden like their email volumes jump up like by 5x, like you're going to see the impacts, and taking that away is going to scare the hell out of people. Because now imagine the alternative where you're like, hey, you should just go ahead and give us $50,000 so we can give these email Gatling guns to all your SDRs. The the head of marketing or the head of marketing ops or whatever is going to be like the what now, right? And so that's why early on being able to prove that so people could say, whoa, actually this is super impactful is important. Usually oftentimes you can get away with a non-trial or a paid POC if there's no other way of doing it, right? Like you actually can't do a deployment like that. Or B, if it's an existing category, right? Where it's just like, oh, okay, cool. Like it's like this, but it's better for these reasons right here. And you can like potentially try it out or like at least have a credible narrative, but like that you need this thing versus adding something on that you've never had before. It's oftentimes a little bit tougher there.
Out of
Um,
here, I think like it's easy. Like one of the reasons I think that like we got this advice is because like there would be trials that would happen and we would lose them for factors outside of our control. Right. And we lose them because maybe their team wasn't ready or maybe they didn't adopt. And like, if you have an outsider kind of looking at this and they might be like, well, like let's factorize all the things out of our control because we can't control those. And let's try to create a sales process that like is around the things that we can control. And I think like that was the instinct that we got from like, advisors and other people we talked to. And it kind of makes sense, like especially if you're coming from like a more mature product, a more mature category, it's like a very reasonable thing to do. But I think like if you're a founder and like you like that's kind of part of the like job to be done in some ways. It's to solve that messy and be okay with that. And like even if you see that, it's like it's actually not a huge deal because again, you're going to be learning so much anyways from those trials that you're doing. So it's like you're increasing your product velocity. Maybe you don't convert them. Maybe it's not as efficient as it could be. But like I think it's always net positive.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is part of the reason why founder-led sales is so important. Because imagine if that was being executed by, a sales manager and four reps and what have you, and so there was like this giant game of telephone that was happening versus you being the one, or like you with some sales reps being the ones to do it, and then saying, "Oh, okay, the reason why this failed was because they didn't have good call data, right? They didn't have good phone numbers." Okay, that will now be part of that will go back into discovery questions where we say, hey, do you guys have a calling program right now? Yes, we do. Okay, cool. How do you guys get phone numbers? how would you rate that? And they're like, oh, it's really good. We actually have three different data sources. We do a munch thing, blah blah blah. And you're like, all right, this is gonna be great. Versus like, I don't know. The last time like we downloaded Zoom Info CSV 24 months ago, and you're like, okay, great. Like, let's go ahead. Like, we're gonna fix that first. And so like, that just ends up being a feature, like a bug in your sales motion, right? That maybe has a product fix to it, but maybe actually has a discovery qualification fix, and maybe has like a sales motion fix. And then like you just patch the sales motion and like, and then recurse and recurse and recurse. Um, Kind of changing gears a little bit here. What worked really well for customer acquisition for you guys?
We did pretty well on LinkedIn. We found that early on. LinkedIn was a pretty good channel. A lot of salespeople are,
Like content?
yeah, content, like founder-led content. We did founder-led content. We did users. We did like live events, like LinkedIn events. We did these like early on like cold call competitions where people would like live dial with everyone. So like community kind of events. So it was, yeah, we did, and like basically we just, I mean, salespeople are on LinkedIn. It's like pretty simple, and it was like a good channel to push
They're
content out.
there. That's where
Um,
they're at, right?
right.
That
So
that's
yeah,
where
so
they're at, and they're supposed to be prospecting, and instead, like you could hit them while they're procrastinating instead of prospecting. They're paying attention to Nooks content.
yeah, that's right. That's right. So yeah, we like we identified that early on, and we basically, I mean, early on, that's how we got a lot of good traction. I mean, we would get people saying, "I've just seen like Nooks all over. Like I've just heard about this," and so even for a relatively small company at the time, I mean, we were able to build a pretty good amount of like hype. Now, it was a little bit of an echo chamber. It's not like really touching the full market, but it was, I mean, we would do cold calls and people would be like, say, yeah, I heard of Nooks on LinkedIn. And I mean, we still have that today, but like even early on, I mean, I'm thinking like 2.5 years ago, we would get that. Yeah, that was a good customer acquisition channel.
Nice. And so post sale, I mean, you talked a lot about the trial motion working, and so if like if utility is being proven pre-transaction, usually that kind of takes a little bit of pressure off of customer success. Um, what what was particularly important when it came to CS, and how did that evolve over time? Because in you guys' case, because this can happen where if somebody's buying sight unseen, or they're like, oh man, that deck was really great, I'm gonna buy. Here's
Yeah,
50
yeah,
grand. And you're like, here you go, CS, have fun, guys. That can be a little bit more fraught. But in you guys' case, people were not buying unless they saw some sort of utility. Now, it might have been an individual team as opposed to like 10 teams, right? And then you'd have to go and like resell it or whatever. Like, what were the kind of the wrinkles that you guys figured
yeah.
out from a
It's
CS standpoint?
funny. Our first CSM we hired, shout out to Terrence, who's awesome with Start Nooks. He actually was, so he was an AE before. And he actually, we actually had him working on the trial. So like we just viewed that as like implementation onboarding.
The
And
sales
so he would,
engineer.
yeah, like I mean he would help run the trials that we were running very early on. And he would do it with our Dan, our CEO, would also be pretty involved in that too. And so um they would pair on that. And so then eventually at some point it made more sense for like this, CS not to be involved pre-sales, but we did that early on. I think actually like the
It's
one that we,
expensive.
yeah, yeah. Well, they actually are for like larger enterprise deals now, which we do that.
Totally.
But
Yep.
I think probably like you said, like I think the trial is like like onboarding often was easy, but it's still you need like success because like you might have one team get on do the trial and there's like five other teams. And then like even as like as you go throughout the like uh months go by and things change and you need to have continued success. So I would say like I don't think we did anything particularly different other than really having a strong customer obsession across the org. Like we hired people that cared. um we consistently get like reviews, and I think this is easier to do early on, and so as a founder you should lean into this advantage that like Nooks really cares about the outcome. Like we listen to customers, we help them, we're more of a partner. I think we've just hired a ton of people that like really truly care about the customer, and we've invested like a lot of money into that, and we have the ratios that make sense, where you can actually we've scaled that up to the size of a business we're at today. um, and so like if one advice for other founders is like, I'd recommend like invest a lot into that because like the last thing you want is like, people to churn that kills your business. So like, you know, we don't view it as a cost center. We obviously have like we have good NDR. We now expanded country. We sell multiple products. And so we always view that as like a really key investment that, you know, is probably pretty expensive. So if you're venture backed, it's helpful. You have a lot of money. But I think it pays long-term dividends for sure.
Yeah, but I think there's a couple things that to kind of call out there. One is focus on outcomes. It's kind of like the jobs to be done thing. And that's really the criticality. It's like identifying the need in the unmet need in the market, which you guys pivoted to, which is great. Which I think is like one thing there is like being humble, right? And saying like, hey, actually, this isn't working, but there's some heat over here. And then once you identified that that was the thing that they were hiring you for, they were hiring you not because you had like Wizzy AI or this or whatever. Like, no, 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 we're hiring you in order to get us to call more, right? And one mechanism by which we're going to do that is through a sales floor and then a parallel dial or whatever. And so then the CSMs are like, all right, we are here not to deploy Nooks, we are here to help you call more,
Yes.
generate more
Yeah.
pipeline.
Yeah.
And then and so a friend of mine, Nick Mehta, who's the CEO of Gainsight, talks about this like you got to focus on outcomes, and make sure. And then the second thing that I think is really powerful that you guys had, you said it was Terrence was the early CSM. So I think what's cool there is you had two things going. One, you had a former practitioner. So I don't know what you said that Terrence was previously an account executive. I imagine that at some point he was probably an SDR,
Yeah.
right? And so he
It
was
was.
used to calling, right? So he had credibility, and not only like credibility, like he could speak the game, right? That's the first thing. The other thing too, and you get this with new categories of software. Oftentimes CSMs view their role as being like a waiter, like, hi, what would you like to order? Versus what
Yeah.
I like to call a personal trainer, where you're like, hey, so you are here today in order to generate more pipeline. And the way that we're going to generate more pipeline is by making you guys badass at calling. And so one component of that is going to be this wonderful, virtual sales floor. Another component of that is also going to be this, this parallel dialer. But part of it is also just going to be expertise and also me kicking your ass if you don't do it, right? And don't get like. And by the way, I'm not the one who's saying this. Your CRO is the one who bought this. And I think an important thing there, like this is always a thing that customer success struggles with, is usually that sort of like polite aggressiveness can be something that's a little bit absent in customer success. And so in you
Yeah.
guys' case, having someone who is a seller who probably didn't have any issues around being candid or not aggressive per se, but polite aggressive, is a powerful thing. And I think that like all those things kind of work really well together when you're talking about a new type of software. Because otherwise, if you're just like dropping it on someone and being like, "All right, guys, have fun, figure it out," and people have never used this before, then that's going to be a recipe for non-adoption and ultimately churn, as you know.
I will say, like, I'm sure probably most companies go through this phase. So RCS definitely started out very reactive. It was basically like putting out fires, right? Like basically, I mean, when you're early on, and we actually probably understaffed it. And when you're early on, it's basically like which customer is complaining now, and let me go figure out how to fix it. And that was kind of like the function. And that, I mean, that's kind of what you have to do. Like you do want to prioritize the fires, right? You don't want to like proactive.
Don't
Putting
leave
out
it
fires is
burning.
probably,
Yeah.
yeah, don't leave the fires burning, right? And so that's kind of what you have to do. And then we started staffing out. We hired a VP of CS, and we got like a lot more people. And that's really when it started to shift to be more like proactive. And you actually had the bandwidth to go and be like, okay, like let me actually guide you through what other orgs do, and like let me talk you through your connect rates are low. Let me give you advice on like how you can improve those. And so like that's maybe like a mistake we made where we didn't invest early enough. And like basically like our RCS was doing support. It's kind of like effectively what was happening
Yeah,
early on.
totally. Yeah,
And then
versus being it's like being reactive. Like, what would you like? What's the issue?
mm,
Oh, you ran
yes,
into something versus like, hey guys, so your connect rates, like we're coming back to our second meeting in week 2, and boy howdy, no one's calling. What's the deal there? Oh, we don't have any data in the CRM. Oh, okay. Well, like let's pull RevOps in and fix that
Yeah,
because
yeah,
for, versus waiting for you guys to come to us and be like, no one's doing any dialing, right? Like let's go ahead and be
yes,
proactive.
totally.
Like, hey, you came to us in order to get your beach bod together in order for your wedding. And you know what? You're actually not doing your crunches and your push-ups. So, we're gonna get on top of that. And like I'm gonna have to report this to your CRO, right? Because he's looking to me to be the one who to drive your success. So like, don't get me in trouble and I won't get you in trouble, right?
Yeah,
That sort of
yeah.
thing. Um, how many customers did you guys close before you hired your first kind of dedicated sales hire?
I don't know exactly. I think it was in the orders of like 20 or so.
Yeah, probably to the point where like it was kind of on repeat, right? You're like, all right, look at this. You can imagine doing your pre-call planning. You're like, okay, it looks like they got 30 SDRs. Okay, the SDRs are all over the place. I see that some are like they're all in different states versus in one thing here. Okay, great, right? And then probably had like a 20 or 30% win rate on like well qualified things. And like at that point, it was like, all right, cool. Now let's bring in incremental sellers to then repeat the sales motion that you had concocted and kind of refined there. What was the profile of your kind of your first sales hires?
Yeah, I mean, we looked for early startup experience. We looked for people that would work really hard. That's like super important. It's a startup, we expect everyone to work hard. So, across the team. So
I don't
those are
know,
things.
for a hot second there in 2021 and 2022, that wasn't fashionable. I guess maybe in you guys' case, you were hiring your first sellers like post SaaS recession in kind of like mid 2023. Perhaps that was helpful insofar as like there had been tons and tons and tons of layoffs, so now people were like, oh, okay, actually, I guess it is important to work at work again.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's fine. I mean, for what it's worth, we've done remote for a while. I think it actually worked, but like you just need to hire, if you're doing remote, you need to hire the people that are good at remote, as I'll put it that way. But that's a whole topic to unpack. But yeah, I mean, like hard work was like super important. We wanted like clear evidence that they would work hard. Like, I mean, we just straight up asked them, like, how many hours did you work, right? Like it's that simple. And so that was important. Startup experience. There are people that want to build process and like that kind of part is important as well. But yeah, I mean, it was our early hires. So I won't say we like knew what we were doing either, right? I think we're now much better at sales. Because like it's one of those things. I mean, even as a founder, just like interviewing in general, I've gotten much better after hiring, hundreds of people and doing hundreds of interviews, thousands of interviews probably at this point. So it's like it's just a muscle you build. Um, but those are kind of the criteria we're looking for.
So working hard, right? When you say people who will do well remote, I mean, usually where my brain goes there is like adults, like hiring like people who like have come up through, maybe already have gone through, an in-office experience. But what were your kind of indicators of someone who's going to work well remote?
Yeah, yeah, we definitely looked at people that were like 5+ years of experience. I mean, we were not looking anything younger than that. I mean, it's for your first sales hires, you don't want to like skimp, like you want like people that are experienced. So like it just doesn't make sense to hire like less junior sellers. I mean, they're going to be building a lot of the process. And especially as the founder, you don't want to have to be like coaching small things. That's not like your probably as the founder, that's probably not your specialty. You want to be able to trust that they're good sellers and you're operating more at the product level, high level strategy questions, not the are you false sending the email after a deal kind of thing. Like that's like not the thing that you should hopefully having to be managed for your early sellers. So yeah. So I would say we were looking like 5 to 8 years of experience plus.
There you go. What did you guys do particularly well aside from, hard quality? It's funny, I was literally having this conversation with a high growth company that I do some sales coaching with the other day, where the the person who's leading sales right now was talking about authenticating willingness to to work and grind and what have you, and I was like, well, have you articulated this? Have you like put it into like the spec? They're like, no, 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 like we communicated to the recruiters via Slack. I'm like, no, 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 like do you have like a specification that says like this is an important thing? And then moreover, one of the things that I'm a big fan of is written screens, right? Or at least like a screen, right? Just it's almost kind of like an inbound form, right? But instead it's Google Doc, and you could just add criteria to it, like, hey, just to be clear, we have an expectation that folks work 10 hours a day because we have so much demand and we have a transactional sales motion. So I need you to type out here, yes, I understand that I'm going to be working 10 hours. Like even sounds kind of stupid, right? But it's just
No,
like
it's good.
essentially a
That's a
hard
good.
qualifier. Yeah, like it's just alignment, kind of like from a
Totally.
customer standpoint, where it's like, hey, on a scale of 1 to 5, how rigorous would you say your current calling program is? Oh, it's like
Yeah.
a 4. Okay, okay, cool. Like, and where do you want it to be? Like just essentially getting people to declare so everyone's just like aligned can be a very helpful thing, and
I
that
like that.
applies to hiring
Yeah.
hiring very much. It's like just hard qualification, and then don't be afraid to strip line folks either. It's like the same way we might say, hey, you know what? Like, I get that you guys say that you want your AEs to be doing pipeline generation and calling, but generally speaking, like, you guys have a fairly high average selling price. You seem like you have an enterprise motion. Enterprise sellers don't like to call me. Like,
It's true. I
I don't
don't
think
think
that,
I've
I
ever
don't,
seen an enterprise caller
I,
that's like really big on pipe gen. They
right,
always got SDR support.
right.
Like,
So you could say that, like, you could imagine saying that to a customer where you have a customer who's like, no, no, no. And he's like, and then you like pull it away from them and you're like,
yeah,
look, man, I think this is, and they're like, no, the CEO specifically said da 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 da. And you're like, awesome. Okay. Well, now that we're all aligned,
uh,
right? And just do
yeah,
the same thing from a hiring standpoint too. I'll share this one really quick story. And then I want to jump to things that you didn't do well. But we were hiring these roles. So early on with Atrium, we had this, this forward deployed motion. We had this what we call GTM ops that was helping to deploy these trials because like Atrium required a bunch of tuning, and so we needed really like rigorous kind of like anal people. And so there's like a whole hiring process that went through that. You had to like do a bunch. You had to like set up a Zapier. You had to follow instructions. You had to set up a Zapier and then like fire it off and so on and so forth. And I got this nasty LinkedIn message from this candidate. Sorry, they didn't even apply. That was the funny thing. This woman saw our job posting
yeah.
and that what was going to be involved in it, and she messaged me on LinkedIn and she said, "Hey, I'm not going to apply to your job, but I just wanted to let you know that you're awful, and I hope you don't hire anybody because of the ridiculousness." And I was like part of me was like, fuck you, man. But on the other side, it's just like, cool. I'm so glad that you didn't apply. I'm so glad that you didn't apply.
That's
And
true.
then we had other people who were like, oh my God, that was so much fun. I had never used Zapier before. And I went through this process and now I know how to use Zapier and it was super cool. And of course they ended up being like really amazing hires because they were super high attention to
Yeah,
detail. They were very curious, et cetera, et
yeah,
cetera. So it's about fit, right? It's
totally,
about alignment and fit.
totally, totally.
So given all that, what um kind of said the things that worked well, what didn't work well in your hiring kind of onboarding process?
We hired our first AE, and yeah, at first we wanted to just hire one person. I think as like a founder, you're kind of very apprehensive to hire. Yeah, yeah. So like you're always apprehensive to hire more people than you need, and early on, it's actually a mindset shift as a founder to like start to like that you actually should hire. Like it's important, and especially as jobs come up. And so early on, I think like we probably underhired early on in the growth phase of Nooks, but easy to say the opposite, right? So, anyways, we did that, and we got really advice that was like, hey, you should do two people. And that turned out to be very, very smart. One of the early hires didn't end up working out. But if you don't have to, it's really hard to know what's working, what's not working. And so that was one thing that maybe we got wrong initially, but we very quickly fixed it, and within a couple months we hired the second person. So that was one thing. Um, the other piece is we learned actually like domain expertise is pretty valuable just for getting things off the ground. One of the person that didn't work out wasn't a good fit, like didn't have the domain expertise of like selling to other sellers. And so that turned out to be a really valuable and skill set. We don't exclusively do that today, but like I think a lot of our early hires, the ones that people ramped really quickly, they knew the space like cold. And that was a valuable skill set.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
especially given the fact that you guys were selling a tool that was not yet deployed in sales
yeah,
land. So
yeah,
like you could imagine any seller could probably sell CRM pretty well because they use CRM all the time, whereas like a parallel dialer is like, kind of an emerging category 3 or 4 years ago. And so as a result, even if you had someone who's like, yeah, I'm a seller, I know how sales things work. Or I was an SDR and I know how it's like, yeah, but you were an SDR sitting in a bullpen at Oracle, right? Dialing using Ring Central. So like things are a little different now. Like this is a distributed environment, this parallel dialer, et cetera, right? So I think that it's important to be kind of be mindful of that. And yes, getting two is important. Now, what's even more important, of course, is to have a statistically significant sample size of founder selling. So you can say, hey, you're not working out. And like, hey, I know that I'm like really smart and handsome, but I sold 20 deals and I've never sold before. So I think that like, I think a normal human being should be able to do this, right? Now imagine a scenario where you only hired one and you hadn't done that. Like maybe you closed one deal. You'd
yeah,
be
you
like,
wouldn't
oh
know.
man, does the
Yeah.
product not work? Right. And this is like why, you know, getting to the top of that S curve from a founder-led sales motion and like making sure that the sales motion is refined and dialed in is so powerful. Nice. Well, well, I think those are all the things that I wanted to cover today. Thank you so much. The last thing I would really kind of like just kind of ask you is if you think about the folks who are 24 months behind you guys, I mean, you guys are pretty far out there, 36 months behind you. What would kind of be your like your biggest recommendation to those folks who are kind of in the middle of their founder-led sales motion right now, like just trying to either A, trying to knock down those early customers, or even B, pre that, like looking for actual demand and some sort of pull, kind of like the two stages of the Nooks story there.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say so like the early PMF days. I mean, I think like to me, when we started to get to like consistent, what I would call like the early inklings of PMF is you can go into a call, you can do discovery, and you can get a pretty consistent, they have a problem, they're going to move forward. And like once you have that kind of like mental model, I think that's when you can see like, okay, there's the inklings of repeatable motion. I just remember like coming after a couple of calls and I'm being like, okay, like I think I know how this works now. Like it's like I can, we need to find more of these people and we need to, build pipeline and all that stuff. But that was kind of like the inklings. So if you're looking for like signs, I think like look for like signs that you can predict the problems someone has based on like, high level attributes or one or two questions that you can ask about them. Um, so that's like my one advice that I felt I learned on the finding PMF. And then on the sales side, I think yeah, I mean I said this earlier, but I would say like um the trial based motion was incredibly effective from an overall company perspective. And it just like it orientated it gave clear goals for the entire company, and it was one of the reasons our product moved really fast. It's one of the reasons our sales moved really fast. So I think it was a good constraint for the company. And it has downsides, but like overall I think it was very, very, very positive. So um yeah, and then I guess like my final thing is like I thought actually personally selling was incredibly helpful for building product. So I do mostly product right now. I don't lead the sales org, but as we build new product, that experience selling is like so impactful to me because I am now able to, as we think about new product, like how would we actually sell this, right? Like all product needs to be sold, and so you need to have that perspective. And so I think
You
like
mean
if
you shouldn't just like build in a closet and like hypothesize and just be like, here you go, have fun, versus like, no, 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 like how is this going to be demoed?
yes, yeah,
Literally
because
how
there's
how's it going to blow people's minds such that they want to buy the thing? Put aside like the
absolutely
deliverability of it, like how I mean it's like the joke about how Apple when they're designing a product, they start with the press release. It's kind of the old
right.
jokes. Like what's the press release or what's the advertisement? And then work backwards from there. In this case, it's like what's the demo to get people excited? What are the discovery questions and what's the demo? So they're like, yes, I want to buy that. Right?
Yeah, because the reality is, if you can't do that, you probably don't have a viable product. I mean, like, like basically, if you can't think of something that you could demo in a 30-minute call, and have people walking away like jaw drop, like, holy shit, did they just do that? I think probably like it's gonna be really hard to sell. So I mean, for us, that was like we would do live calls with customers, and like, they're like, "Are you calling real people?" And like, they would just like they would have this and that worked really well for us. And every new part of the product, we do similar stuff where we have like real time, like what's that wow
What's the
factor? I
oh
think
wow?
that's yeah. So yeah. Those are my two pieces of advice.
I love it. Well, Rohan, thank you very much for taking the time to share with everyone. I mean, I think, like I kind of said at the opening, the kind of the pivot, like the pivots over time, and kind of like following, like listening for the sucking sound, being the
Yeah,
heat-seeking missile, was really the kind of the key to what you guys, have achieved. And then once you were doing that, also making sure that that feedback loop continued to be the case, that like that OODA loop kept happening in by forcing it in the trial function or in the trial motion. Those two things together really just have like, made it such that Nooks could keep adding incremental jobs to be done that like hit the ground running in an oh wow way such that people buy. So, congratulations on all that, and people are going to get a lot of value out of this. So thank you very much.
thank you, Pete. Really appreciate the conversation.